button, Stephen.
All right,
Um,
I'll stop swearing.
no, it's. I think we can swear. Everyone's an adult here. Yeah, everyone's an adult here. I've got a connecting. The best part of all of this remotely is that the hotel Wi-Fi keeps dropping. So I've now fallen off the Wi-Fi. I'm on 5G. Okay, we're live. We've got one viewer, which is a great place to start. I'm assuming that first viewer is either one of our parents, possibly. They're always there, rallying to support their kids. It's wonderful.
There we go. I see a lot of people joining.
That's
Exciting.
fantastic. Sometimes you see a name that you recognize, and it warms the cockles of your heart.
If you drop off, with further tech communication problems, I'll just improvise. I'll just
You
go
just keep
off
going.
on a
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Just never stop.
I can do
The
45
show
minutes
must
straight.
go on. Right. Well, look, as people come in, I'll just thank them for joining us on this live exponential view discussion. I'm Azim, and I'm, as you may tell from my glamorous surroundings, in a hotel room, and I'm in Palo Alto, in California, and really happy to have my old friend Stephen Johnson with us, who I think is not too far from me. Stephen, where are you?
I'm up in Marin, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge at our place here. Although I'm about to, when we get off this, I'm going to get on a plane and go back to New York.
Fair
But
enough.
we just missed each other yesterday in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, yeah, we did. And Marin, of course, is, I guess, famously Skywalker territory.
Yes, exactly. It's the birthplace of, Star Wars and Pixar. Um,
Not
so
bad.
all roads leading eventually to Disney.
Yes. Well, you have Star Wars and Pixar, and I've got things like, Juniper Networks and Cisco, and the heart of the internet, Palo Alto Networks, of course, where I am. And so we're going to chat a little bit about your new project, but I'm just going to fill the space a little bit longer while people keep coming in. Yeah, we're up to about 55. Say hi to everyone. You can, of course, thank you everyone who's joined us. Do put a note as to where you're from in the chat. It is always great to know where people are coming from. So today's discussion is with my old friend Stephen Johnson, or as I knew him, Stephen Berlin Johnson. And in British culture, you don't have these fancy middle names that get presented. And back in the early 90s, when I first met Stephen, it was like, how important is the Berlin in that name? Because it was always there. So let's start there, Stephen, before we tell people what we're going to talk about. What is
Yeah.
the Berlin?
Yeah. Well, I think actually there's a funny story about it. So I think you probably actually came across it in the late 90s because I made my blog Stephen Berlin Johnson, and that like that stephenberlinjohnson.com. And it was never my author name, but my blog had that, and so then it kind of like took off or whatever, which is kind of roughly when we met each other in the late 90s, I think. And uh but when I published my first book, um my dad, this is like 97, my dad was like, so what's your author name going to be? And I was like, what do you mean? It's going to be Stephen Johnson. And he's like, no, 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 it should be Stephen Berlin Johnson. And I was like, well, I know, I mean, I like that middle name, but like I'm already kind of out there as Stephen Johnson, and it sounds kind of pretentious if you add the middle name in there. And my dad was like, I know, but Stephen Johnson is such a boring name. I was like, thanks, Dad. You know, you could have thought of that a while ago.
When you named you.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, he could have called you.
exactly.
There were lots of other first names you could have had.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's
Well,
I'm mostly Stephen Johnson.
you're mostly Stephen Johnson, but you will always be found. And the beauty of the Berlin is you'll always be
Yeah.
found. Okay, so your um, new project is Notebook LM, which is it's being described as Google's Chat GPT moment for AI. And I'm thinking about all the things that Google has done in AI over the last 20 years, including AlphaFold, for which it received
Yeah.
a Nobel
Yeah.
Prize,
I think that maybe is a
AlphaZero,
little
and so
more
on.
important, but whatever.
But this is the big one. So how does it feel, holding the Chat GPT crown for Alphabet?
I think Google has done lots of things that have been very impressive in the AI space that have been recognized by the world. But it has been really fun for we've been working on this for more than 2.5 years now, or just under 2.5 years. So it's been kind of under the radar. I mean, it was literally a secret project for a while, and then it was an experimental project, and then we had just gone uh, international um, in June, and we saw a big kind of overseas embrace. For a while, we had more users in Japan than we did in the US. And then it really, and that was a point in June was when it really started to be fully useful. I feel like it kind of was living up to the ambition that we had for it at the beginning, because that was when we switched over to Gemini 1.5 and introduced
Mm-hmm.
some things like Notebook Guide and the inline citations that we have, which we can talk about. And then 6 weeks ago, we added this audio overviews feature.
Oh yeah.
And it's just such a kind of like magical um, demonstration of the technology that is also useful, right? You know, there are a lot of things it can do that people are finding really like helpful in their workflows, but it also just has this magic, and it's shareable. And we just didn't have anything in the product like until
Mm-hmm.
audio overviews came along. If you were trying to like really get why Notebook was so good, you had to like upload some very complicated source material, ask a very
Right.
complicated question, get an enormously nuanced answer with footnotes, and you follow those citations back to the original source. Like all that is really impressive, but like it doesn't play on TikTok at all.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
and so we were missing, you know, something that was viral in a way, and so we got that with audio overviews. And so it's been really fun. You
It's
know,
been
just
pretty exponential since
yeah.
then, I guess. We've just passed 100 viewers, so this is a great moment for me to quickly summarize what we're going to talk about today. So I'm with Stephen Berlin Johnson, an acclaimed author, I have to say, a one of the people who for more than 30 years has been thinking about the intersections of media, culture, technology, particularly the internet. He is one of the few people, I think, who built a website before I did that was sort of at any scale, with websites being built in the mid 90s out of New York, and is now the editorial director of NotebookLM. We'll start with a question really to who's listening. If you have used NotebookLM, it would be great. I don't know how you're going to signify this. Maybe you're going to hit the heart, but you could hit the heart and say, "Yeah, I've used NotebookLM," or "I am using it," or you could tell us what your use case is in the chat. My team is actually listening to that chat, and they will fill it that and edit it and push it into a back channel to me, so we can raise those use cases or questions with Stephen. That's the Exponential View team, and if you're not already subscribing to our Substack, you should definitely do that. There's probably a button somewhere that allows you Exponential View. It's even better when you pay us, which is only $120 a year. So I recommend you do that if you're not doing that already. So let's get started with this. I mean, we are sort of faced with the information overwhelm, right? Overload was a term we used to use. I think it's now overwhelming. There's an ad for the new Mac Mini, where the Mac Mini with the M4 processor boasts about how many tabs you can open
Right.
on it
Yeah.
in your browser.
Yeah.
And many of us, unfortunately, are afflicted with having to use Google Chrome, which is a sort of the most horrible of browsers. I'm just saying that in the hope that someone in your Chrome product team is listening to this. Please fix it. And we have all these tabs open. We think, oh, this is going to be important. I better keep it open. I better keep it open. There's a sense of FOMO that is going on. And that is the sort of daily struggle of information overload. Can you paint the picture of the problem that you were trying to solve with NotebookLM?
Yeah, that's Azim, that's a great way to describe it. No surprise coming from you. The one of the things I would always talk about in the early days of the project was that, you know, we were trying to build something that would showcase and bring out the utility of these amazing new language models. And so a lot of the innovation was coming from the underlying models themselves. But a big part of it was what we were trying to do on the user interface side of it. And as you know, like my first book was called Interface Culture. So I've been obsessed with like the way that software kind of shapes the way that we work and the way that we think. And you know, when we started working on it, there actually wasn't even a chat interface. Like it was before Chat GPT, but it was a sense of like the native format for how we interact with language models is is yet to be invented or hadn't been invented at that point. And so we were trying to build, instead of saying let's add some AI to a word processor or let's add some AI to a spreadsheet, existing formats, let's
Hmm.
create a new kind of app. And part of the idea there was that people were exactly as you say, like so much of anybody who does any kind of knowledge work, you find yourself in these situations where like the job you are trying to do involves synthesizing information that is scattered across 15 open tabs and a bunch of documents sitting on your drive and wherever all this information is all over the place. And whatever you're doing, whether you're writing a book, whether you're working on a marketing plan, whether you're conducting user research and you've got 20 different transcripts, whether you're working on a documentary and you got all these interviews, like it's very hard to manage. And it doesn't, it, the feeling of like, oh, I'm going to switch from tab to tab and like command F my way to the information that I'm looking for, just like does not
Hmm.
work. And so,
Right. Right.
so the idea was like, maybe we can build a new kind of surface where you spend very little time like thinking about how you organize any of this information. You throw it all into kind of like one space, and there's an AI that is grounded in the documents that you put into it. Like, this has become called RAG. We always
Right.
called it
Just
source
actually,
grounding.
I think I want you to pull up that word grounded, right? So you just
Yeah.
grounded means what in this
Yeah.
context?
So when you go into Notebook, basically the first thing you have to do, I mean, maybe to a fault, is you cannot have a conversation with the model without uploading sources. So those can be, docs, PDFs, slides, markdown, many formats. We just
Hmm.
added YouTube. And once you upload those documents, everything that the AI says to you or generates for you in that space will be grounded in those documents. And that means they will see those documents as kind of a source of truth. If you ask questions that are specific to those documents that the model would otherwise have no idea about, right? It's like they don't know what's in your marketing plan. That's not part of their training data. So suddenly you can personalize the model in this way that was very hard to do before. And you can put a huge amount of information in there. So a single notebook can have 25 million words of information.
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
quite good. I mean, it gets a little bit noisier as it gets bigger. Probably right now, the optimal zone is maybe like 100,000 words or less. But it,
Right.
it will work quite well with very large notebooks, and it's just going to get better and better. And crucially about grounding, if you load up a notebook of exponential view posts, and then you
Hmm.
ask a question about Taylor Swift, and you have not written about Taylor Swift, and I honestly, maybe you have written about Taylor Swift, but
Yeah, maybe.
the model will say, NotebookLM will say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I can't answer your question about um, Taylor Swift because there's nothing about that in the sources."
Right.
And so you
So
feel like you're
that's kind of
bound by the topic.
right. Okay. So I want to actually play around with that idea. So one of the interesting things that emerges from large language models is that they're so useful because they know everything, right? If you have a sort of large language model architecture, but you just train it on exclusively on dentistry material, it's not that useful because it doesn't have any of the kind of common sense referencing that lives elsewhere. But then you run into this feature slash bug when you're using a traditional large language model like a Claude, which is it's really helpful that it knows everything because you can ask for a baseball analogy when you're doing something to do with software
Yeah.
development. Um, what you have described though is grabbing the what I'm going to roughly call, although the AI people will strangle me for it, the common sense that you get out
Yes.
of a very large language model, but effectively saying constrain yourselves to applying that knowledge and that thinking to the documents that are in the set that I've uploaded.
Yes, exactly. And what it the way I kind of imagine it's very important to stress to people like, we are not training the model on your information, right? So all we are doing is putting this information in the context window for the model. And, I think your listeners probably know they're very tech sophisticated, but that is effectively like the short-term memory of the model. And so the long-term
Right.
memory is like its training data that takes, many months to generate, and is based on everything. And then what
Mm-hmm.
goes into the context is is short term, and it gets wiped the second your session ends. So there's no security risk, there's no copyright risk. You know, whatever you put in as a source will not, you know, leak into other people's experience
Leak.
of
Right.
Google's AI. But it gives you this really like you have this feeling that, oh wow, this AI is really, it's kind of like becomes an instant expert in the
Mm-hmm.
information I've uploaded. And so, and I think one of the reasons why audio overviews, which basically like you upload a source or a set of sources, and then you can click one button and it will generate this kind of 10-minute conversation, kind of podcast style with kind of amazingly compelling voices. Part of the magic there was, wow, those voices sound incredible. Like there's some amazing voice technology there as well. But I think for a lot of people, you know, in the AI community, the idea of like uploading documents and having a chat with a model was something that people knew about. But I think most ordinary consumers had not had that experience where you had a source grounded AI experience. And so just hearing these AI voices having a remarkably sophisticated conversation about you, like people are putting their journals in there and then they're
Mm-hmm.
generating podcasts and they're like, well,
Right.
Julie had kind of a rough day on Tuesday. And they're just like, wow, I can't believe this AI
I,
knows
I
who I
yeah,
am.
it's really, I mean, that piece is really remarkable, right? This kind of flourishing of this flourishing of uses that are hot,
Yeah.
is that talks to this being a little bit more like a platform or a product
Yes.
than, you know, it's like um, a specific instance. And I too saw that example where some woman had uploaded her daily journals as a way of having some active self reflection on where, you know, where she
Yeah.
was, and of course she's tweaked it with creating an audio summary, which I think is quite, you know, it's kind of quite a beautiful way of using the technology. And what are the other really surprising uses that have come out? And then we'll dive into like the real granularity, the really deep questions about what a technology like this means for information creation. But let's talk about uses for a second. Two or three other
Yeah,
fun ones.
yeah. Well, one of my favorite ones, which dates back to the early days of NotebookLM, which we did not see. One thing we did that was unusual for Google is, and this was all my product manager, Riza Martin, co-lead, Riza. We opened up a Discord very early in the day in the product, and now there's like 80,000 people in that Discord, and like we just, it's a great place where we see all these unexpected uses. So if people want to join that, they should. Um, but one thing that just kind of blew us away earlier was like all these like role-playing game folks, like all these Dungeons and Dragons players and other RPGs. So it, you know, it turns out like
We have a D&D person on the call now listening. I think the name is Baylor Heath, and he says he uses it for his D&D, or
yeah,
they say they use it for their D&D. So if they're
totally.
still on the call, they should hit the heart and maybe explain how they do it, and then we'll come back. Okay, so you got all these D&D people,
Yeah, well, because D&D
Dungeons and
is like
Dragons role playing.
it's an incredibly like literary game. You know, it's a game that involves like a large corpus of text knowledge that is dependent on playing the game. And so when you're playing or you're building your campaign or whatever, there's just like, oh my gosh, like what was the name of that orc and how many hit points did they have? Whatever. I don't really play D&D, so I'm kind of making this up. But and so they were
All of
like, oh,
that
I'm
sounded highly credible, right? Orcs and
thank
hit
you.
points.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, and then it turns out, actually, this is, I haven't actually shared this yet. It's breaking news, but I actually got so inspired by that that I kind of rewrote the core prompt in for the main Q&A kind of text chat in NotebookLM and said, instead of basically being a research assistant, which is pretty much the way it's instructed to behave, I was like, you are a dungeon master, and I want you to guide me through the game, and here are the rule. I basically said, here are the rules of D&D, here's the campaign we're playing, take those and like conduct a game and I'll be the player. And it like just worked like right out of the gate. Like it was incredibly good.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
we may down the line, we're thinking about like different personas, and so we may have a like game mode of Notebook LM. So anybody who's in that
Right.
group, please stay tuned for that.
And one of the listeners, Hugh Knowles, says, you know, he loved when Kevin Roos uploaded his bank statements and the podcast hosts critiqued his spending habits,
Yeah,
which
His
is
Uber writing. They're like, Ubers are
is
very
that right? Was he
expensive.
doing
Yeah,
too
yeah,
much
yeah.
Ubering? Okay, okay. So let's
Wait,
dive
hey,
into a
Azim,
couple of questions. Oh yeah,
let me just say one thing here because it's really
yeah,
important. I think it might lead
right.
into where you're going, which is The fascinating thing, and this is true of text notebook and audio notebook as well, is what in the audio overviews, what the hosts have been instructed to do is basically whatever sources you give it, is basically like make them as interesting as possible. Find the things that are interesting and surprising and express those and explain those in the chat. And you can do that
So this
in
is
the
the
in the
prompt for the podcast, the two podcast hosts.
yeah, but you can do it inside. I do it all the time inside a notebook. So I'll like find something that I'm interested in exploring, whatever, and I'll load it in. I'll be like, okay, tell me what's the most surprising information in this document. And the models have this like extraordinary capacity for identifying surprising or interesting things. And I believe that what's happening there is that is a place where its overall knowledge of the world is really important.